Well, welcome to this video. I think it's the fourth module. We're looking at populations and sampling. Now, a lot of this is stuff that you've heard before, but we do need to go over it, and I'm going to hopefully be a bit more specific than we have been in the past. So there is some important things that we look at when we are talking about finding a sample and doing surveys and things like that. And some important terms there are population and sample. So population is everyone that you are making the assumption of. Let's say you're wanting to see what proportion of people in New South Wales drive as opposed to walk places. That's the population is New South Wales. The sample are the people you actually survey, because it's very hard to actually survey everyone in New South Wales. You do get things like a census, which is a survey of the entire population, but generally these are once every 4 years sort of thing. A sample is where we take a certain number of those people. So if we've got a population on this side, the sample is going to be just those few animals there, because it's easier and cheaper to just sample a few of them. Now, when we are looking at a sample, we can have a sample that is either valid or invalid. So you can see here, this is a pretty valid sample. You want it to be representing the population well, pretty much random. You can see here there's a good range of different types of animals and different colors of animals, and so we're representing the population we have there well. In contrast, this would be an invalid sample. It's probably been one Stegosaurus, I think that is, gone to all of his family and asked them, but then the result we get is probably going to be very leaded that way. Think, for example, you're talking about favorite food. You're going to probably come up with a plant. Whereas if we included the T-Rexes there, you're going to have more people interested in eating meat. So we need to be careful when we choose our sample to make sure that it is as random as possible and it's going to give us a valid response. Okay, so we're now going to look at bias, and there's a few ways that bias show up, and we really just want to be minimizing those. It's good for you to be able to identify what bias has appeared. And so I'm going to try to give you a list of different things you can be looking for. Of course, this is not extensive, but it should give you a good enough idea. So firstly, bias can appear in our data because of the sampling method we've used. So that's how we choose which people we're going to be surveying. So ideally, we're getting a random sample. We might do that by going to a phone book and choosing every 15th person. Even in that case, it is a bit unrandom because maybe not everyone puts their number in the phone book. I know I don't have a landline, I just have a mobile, so I wouldn't come up in something like that. So we need to get a random sample, but we need to also think about the ways that we're getting that random sample. Location is one way of getting bias when we find a sample. For example, if we're talking about New South Wales, we live in Parramatta, so we ask people just in Parramatta, we're not going to get results that probably reflect the whole of New South Wales. So location can be a factor. We want to make sure we're surveying people from all over New South Wales. Relation as well. So how you've come to survey these people, are they just friends and family? Because friends and family are probably going to have similar values to you and views to you compared to people who aren't. So we need to make sure that we're surveying people who aren't necessarily related to us. And this could also be coming up in a work situation, for example. If we just survey people we work with, they're probably going to hold similar views to us. Next, we have volunteer response. Now, this is an interesting one, but it's where if you send out an email and people get to choose if they respond. Now, of course, we need to have choice, but if you're sending it out and you're, say, a musician, you're asking people about their opinion of your music, you're probably going to have the people that really don't like your music saying you need to change this. The people who really have strong opinions saying this is great, and the people who don't really care that much, but maybe like your music a little bit, maybe not as likely to respond. So we need to make sure we're taking that into account. The people choosing to respond is good, but we need to make sure that that's not skewing our data. Convenience bias, again, is like this relation to people, location. It's where we have people, say, on a database, and it's easy to email them, but maybe they don't actually represent the population that well. So convenience is generally talking about that sort of thing. Finally, underrepresentation. if our sampling method doesn't give us a big enough sample, we get one person, we're going to get a very different result to what the population would generally be. So another way that we can have bias appear is because of the types of questions we ask. So firstly, we could have leading questions. For example, if we worked together and I gave you a survey and it said, what problems do you have about our boss? Maybe you don't actually have any problems with our boss, but because I've asked you that question, you're now going to be thinking about it in that way. And you're going to be starting to pick up things as you're answering the question, which otherwise you wouldn't have thought of. And as a result, it skews the results in a certain direction. So we need to be careful about leading questions. Also response bias. So this is where maybe a person doesn't want to be as truthful about what they're saying. For example, if I ask you, have you ever lied to your parents? And your parents are going to read that the results of the survey, you're probably not going to be as truthful, and your results might be skewed there because you don't want to respond in a certain way. Next, misunderstanding questions. So if I ask you a question that has lots of technical language or big words in there and you don't understand what they are, you will end up guessing a bit, guessing what it asks, and it may end up in some false data coming through. And finally, if there's limited response options. So if I was asking the question, what's your favorite color? I give you 3 options. Your favorite color is blue and I didn't say it. Then the data is going to be skewed because it's not actually your favorite color being represented there. Finally, we can have bias come up because of the person funding the research. Now, this is an important thing to think about. If you see research published by a drug manufacturer and it's about the certain drug that they're using, which says that it's a very good thing, it may not be as reliable as research done by an independent third party. So we need to make sure that we're looking at who has funded the research. And it can impact it in different ways. If I'm funding research for my own product, I may choose a sample who's more likely to like that product and give it high ratings so that my results look really good. I can also ask questions which are specific to my product and will draw out a certain response. So that comes back to the idea of guided questions or leading questions. Okay, finally we have sample sizes. Now there's no hard and fast rule about the size of a sample. In previous years, I've seen it in the textbook as a square root of the population, which can be a good general idea for thinking about it. There are some things we should be thinking about when we're talking about the sample size though. Firstly, who are we sampling? We need to ask how big the population is, and then who of that are we going to take out? A sample size is going to be impacted by the amount of money you have to do the survey and the research, but we need to make sure we're getting a big enough sample to actually represent the population. You also need to ask what type of questions you're trying to answer. So making sure that the people you're sampling aren't outside your population and that they're going to be able to respond to your questions appropriately. A rule of thumb for finding our sample is that you should be aiming for a minimum of 100 people. Now, obviously in assessments here, you're probably not going to do that. But if you were doing a survey outside of school for a company and you wanted it to be statistically valid, you'd want to get more than 100 people to do that. The square root of n is a good idea, but also make sure that your survey is more than 100 people because that's going to more likely represent the population. Of course, if you're surveying and it's about year 9 students, you're probably not going to need 100 people for that. But the sample size, we need to just make sure we do have enough people to adequately represent the population. So sorry this video has been so long. Hopefully you now have a few more concrete ideas on how you can be commenting about how valid a sample is and how valid survey questions are, and a framework to sort of respond to those types of questions. If you have any questions, please do ask me. Otherwise, continue on with the work, and I'll see you in the next video.